So you famously studied with Jaco Pastorius. Now, for those of our listeners who don't know Jaco, you should turn this podcast off and go listen to his debut record because it's probably one of the best fusion records of all time. Um, but you got to study with him, and I'm curious, what kind of things did you learn in lessons with him?
Yeah, he was a really complicated guy. Uh, he was bipolar, so he was pretty ill, and he was full of contradictions, absolutely full of contradictions. He knew a lot about music, but often liked to play as if he didn't, which is kind of odd. He When I was studying with him in New York in the early 80s, he had a dream to start a bass school. He really wanted to have a bass school and really wanted to have a way of teaching electric bass in this really advanced, really creative way. But in spite of that, he had no real method or curriculum or anything like that, which is kind of funny. And it could be he taught a fair amount in those days, and it could be really off-putting to a lot of people. A lot of people went to him for lessons, and he would just stare at them, and they were really freaked out by that. I kind of got the vibe right from the bat and said, "Okay, well, I have about 1,000,000 questions I'd like to ask you." And he was always super sweet, and he liked that. He liked it that I had plenty of stuff for us to work on, and he would always answer my questions very, very kindly. And so it was mostly directed. Mostly I directed kind of where I wanted to go. I When I studied with him, I already understood his music pretty well on a technical level, but I really was struggling to understand, like, the connection between how he was making the music and I guess that's it. I understood, the chords and the notes, but it was really hard to understand how that was coming out of a human being. And so I asked him a lot of questions about his fingerings for things and his phrasing for things, and some extent a little bit about harmony, whether he was thinking of this as a augmented chord or whether he was thinking of it more as an altered chord, things like that. But it was, mostly kind of the hands-on, you know, how did you do this? And yeah, and he was always very nice about it. Often it would be something where I would say, like, I would have a piece of his that he played. I would play it for him, and I would say, am I doing this right? And often I wouldn't have it right. He'd have fingered it in some really bizarre way that wouldn't have occurred to me. And he'd show me that, and I'd try to play it and say, well, it doesn't sound like when you played it. And he'd often say, no, it sounds fine. And I'd say, oh, well, okay, let's talk about something else then. So that's kind of the way it went. Um, yeah, he liked to play a lot together. So we would sit and play jazz standards a lot together. And he was pretty good at instructing through that method, where I would, be playing through a standard and, not really making a certain set of harmony all that clear. And then he would play and then he would solo in a way that made it clear. And I go, right, right, right. That's what I need to do. Um, but yeah, that was kind of how it went. I mostly had to kind of direct a lot of the instruction myself, but that was fine. It's totally fine.
Do you remember what songs you played to him of his?
Yes, I remember playing. There's a solo he played on an Ian Hunter record. It was right around the time he did his first record, so early or around 1977. The record's called All American Alien Boy, I think, and that's the title track. And he played a bass solo on this pop tune, and it's so amazing. It's just like, wow, kind of hard to describe. It's not like super chopsy, but it's just really, the melodic ideas are just really clever. And I played it for him and asked it if I was phrasing it correctly, and he corrected me on some of that phrasing. And I tried to get from him, how he came up with that. And he was a little bit helpful with that. He said that some of that came from Frank Sinatra. Um, there's a phrase he used to play all the time that actually is a standard bluegrass lick. Boom, ba bum ba. It's a standard thing you do on the banjo. It's in bluegrass. It's a way that you kind of announce the end of a phrase. Often, like if you're soloing, that will be the last thing you'll play to announce that you're done with your soloing. And he loved that lick and put it in everywhere. But often he would have displaced it rhythmically or done it in different, changed a few notes in it. But yeah, that's where he got it from. It's very common to hear that kind of music in Florida. That's where he got it. Some of the other things were he learned a lot from this pianist he played with, Alex Darkey. He used to play with him a lot and learned a lot of this kind of country stuff. But the way he would play it was really different. So yeah, that was interesting.
I thought you were gonna
And
say like
yeah,
Teen Town or something, like you played Teen Town right to his face or something like that.
I did. I did play
No,
Teen
did you?
Town to make sure that I had it right, and I didn't have some of the notes right,
Oh my
which he
god.
corrected me on. Uh, and that was one where I played it and I said, it just doesn't sound right. And he said, no, that's perfect. That's exactly how it should sound. And I said, no, it isn't. It doesn't sound good at all. How can I play it like you? And he kept saying, don't worry about playing like me. Just the way you're playing is perfect. Just play it that way. And I said, yeah, I don't want to play it that way. That was actually kind of helpful because it made me realize that, you know, that I'm not Jaco. I'm never going to play it like Jaco, and neither should I. If I could play it exactly like him, the best that would be a, pale recreation as opposed to, playing it like myself, which might actually be something interesting. So that it was helpful. He said things like that a lot where, it's okay to imitate me, but, at some point you just have to not worry about it and just do what you're going to do. And that's fine. That's actually a good thing. that was hard for me to understand. He had to keep saying that over and over, actually, because that was hard for me to understand in those days. That it wasn't just about imitating him as closely as I possibly could.
That is so wild. I can't imagine playing Teen Town in front of Jaco. That's like playing Little Wing in front of Hendrix. It's just like, God, that would be such a. I'd be the balls you have, man, to pull that
Well,
off.
it was really nerve wracking, and I was completely terrified because I worshipped the guy. My whole world revolved around him, and I played it horribly. But I wanted to know if I was playing it right. That was the most important thing. To try to play it right. It is a really interesting melody. It's really put together in this really interesting way. The way it works. It's basically thinking like bebop, and he was really good at doing those kinds of things. But that part of it I understood, so we didn't really have to go over that as much as just the mechanics of trying to play it and make it sound good. That was the hard part for me. Still is the hard part for me.
So the other thing I was going to bring up is that Jaco is probably known for having probably the most famous solo bass composition, which is Portrait of Tracy. Um, did you guys ever show each other any solo bass work you were doing? Because you told me you've been composing solo bass pretty much from the get go. Did you ever show him any of your solo bass work or anything like that?
I did show him one piece that I was working on a little bit, and he was very supportive and said, you need to, just keep doing that. But, it wasn't, everything I played for him was pretty horrible. So I wouldn't have expected much more from him than that. And I did play some of Portrait of Tracy for him to see if I got it right. He never really played the whole piece. I think he had forgotten a lot of it. I've never been able to play it very well because there's a point at which where you have to have this really big stretch. He plays an E flat harmonic or D sharp harmonic, more technically correct. And you have to, in order to do it, you have to have this big stretch. And I just could never do it. And he kept telling me I could. I can't do it. I just can't. He kept saying, no, you've got it. And I still can't play it. So I never was very good at playing that for him. But he wasn't really that interested in that kind of thing so much. Um, yeah. Uh, he was certainly supportive. I think part of it was, he had broken up with Tracy at that point and had a lot of emotions about playing the piece. He always would quote from it, play the first part of it. But I don't think I ever heard him play the whole thing live. That I'm not sure. In fact, I don't know if there's a recording of him playing the whole piece live.
I don't believe there is.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think he wrote
yeah,
other
that's
stuff and he
strange.
started playing with like loopers and stuff for his
Yeah,
solos and stuff.
yeah, yeah.
It's just wild.